The wheels of the automobile turned with a quiet and consistent whisper against the smooth, dark asphalt of the suburban lane, a sound so familiar it had become a part of the evening's gentle music. He drove not with haste, but with a placid intentionality, his hands resting lightly upon the steering wheel, his gaze soft as it drifted over the passing tapestry of the world outside his window. The day was drawing to a close, pulling a heavy blanket of deepening twilight across the sky, a canvas painted in the most extraordinary shades of bruised purple and soft, fading orange. The sun, a molten coin of gold, had already dipped below the line of the distant hills, but its lingering warmth still clung to the air, a final, tender caress before the coolness of the October evening truly took hold. Along the road, the trees stood like ancient sentinels, their branches ablaze with the fiery hues of autumn. Leaves of crimson and amber, rust and gold, trembled in the gentle breeze, some letting go and spiraling slowly, lazily, to the ground in a silent, scattered dance. They formed a rich carpet upon the manicured lawns of the houses that lined the street, each home a quiet testament to the lives lived within. Here and there the first playful hints of the coming Halloween season had begun to appear. A cheerful, round pumpkin with a clumsily carved smile sat on a porch step, its hollow eyes seeming to watch him pass with a benign and knowing gaze. On another lawn, a string of lights in the shape of miniature ghosts had been draped across a hedge, their pale forms glowing softly in the diminishing light, not with menace but with a kind of gentle welcome. These simple decorations were not startling or garish. They were small, quiet acknowledgments of the turning of the season, of a time for stories and warmth, for remembering the sweetness of childhood fears that had long since lost their power to frighten. He felt a gentle stirring within his chest, a subtle warmth that had nothing to do with the car's heater. It was the faint initial tremor of a memory, a feeling from a time long past, connected intrinsically to this specific season, this particular quality of light, this very feeling of homebound peace. The low, steady hum of the engine was a constant, comforting presence, the mechanical heartbeat of his journey. It was a sound of transition, the audible thread connecting the world of work and responsibility to the sanctuary that awaited him at the end of this winding road. He slowed the vehicle, the gentle pressure of his foot on the brake a practiced and fluid motion. The car turned smoothly from the main road into his own driveway, the sound of the tires changing as they met the crunching, textured surface of the gravel. It was a sound that signaled the end of the journey, the final few feet of a path he had traveled thousands of times. He brought the car to a halt, the engine idling for a moment, its quiet rumble a final soft sigh. Then with a turn of the key he silenced it. The sudden absence of the sound was profound. It was not an emptiness but a presence, a stillness that rushed in to fill the space the engine's hum had occupied. Into this deep and resonant quiet, the true sounds of the evening began to emerge, delicate and clear. The rustle of the wind as it whispered through the branches of the great oak tree in his yard, its leaves, 1,000 tiny voices chattering amongst themselves. Far off, the lonely caw of a single crow settling in for the night. This was the true sound of his return, the symphony of his own small corner of the world. He remained seated for a long moment, simply breathing, his eyes closed. He let the day fall away from him, sloughing off the concerns and the conversations, the tasks and the thoughts, allowing them to dissolve into the peaceful quiet of the car's interior. With a slow, deliberate movement, he opened the door, the soft click of the latch seeming loud in the stillness. He swung his legs out and stood, his feet finding the familiar, solid ground. A current of cool air, crisp with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, washed over him, waking his senses. It felt clean and pure against his skin, a refreshing balm after the contained air of the car and the office before it. He closed the car door, the sound a solid and satisfying thud that echoed briefly in the twilight, before being absorbed by the surrounding quiet. He stood for a moment by the side of the car, simply observing his home. It was not a grand or imposing structure, but it was sturdy and well-loved, its windows glowing with a light that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. He began to walk, his footsteps measured and unhurried on the uneven flagstones of the path that led to the front door. The stones were cool and solid under the soles of his shoes, each step a familiar grounding sensation. The air carried with it the faint, smoky scent of a distant neighbor's fireplace, a fragrance that spoke of warmth and comfort, of a hearth and a home settled in for the evening. His gaze was fixed on the large window of the living room, a bright rectangle of pure, unadulterated welcome. The light that poured from it was not the harsh, sterile white of a modern bulb, but a deep and gentle gold, the color of honey and old amber. It spilled out onto the dark green of the manicured lawn and the weathered wood of the porch, creating a pool of serene luminescence in the encroaching darkness. It was a beacon, a silent promise of the peace that lay just beyond the threshold. He could see the faint, indistinct shapes of the furniture within, the familiar outlines of the armchair and the tall bookshelf, all softened and made dreamlike by the gentle glow. This light was the heart of the house made visible, a tangible representation of the love and the life that filled the rooms within. It was a sight that never failed to touch him, to quiet the lingering noises of the world inside his head and replace them with a profound sense of gratitude. He knew that just beyond that glass, his world was waiting for him, complete and whole. Reaching the front door, he paused, his hand hovering for a moment before reaching into his pocket. His fingers brushed against the cool, smooth metal of the house key, a small, familiar talisman that he had carried for more years than he could easily count. Its edges were worn soft from use, its surface etched with the tiny, invisible scratches of 1,000 turns in 1,000 locks. He drew it out, its brassy surface catching the faint, residual light from the sky. He looked at it for a second. This simple object, this key to his sanctuary. He then fit it into the lock, the motion so practiced it required no thought at all. The key slid into the keyhole with a soft, metallic whisper. He turned it, feeling the slight resistance of the tumblers, the series of tiny, intricate movements happening within the mechanism. Then came the sound, a distinct and satisfying click as the bolt slid back. It was the sound of permission, the sound of entry, the sound of coming home. It was a small sound, but it held within it the weight of his entire life, the culmination of all the journeys that had led him to this very door, to this very moment. He rested his hand on the cool brass of the doorknob, feeling its solid weight beneath his palm. He turned the knob and pushed the door inward, and at once he was met by the scent of his home. It was a fragrance that could never be bottled or replicated, a unique and complex perfume woven from countless ordinary moments. It smelled of old books and dried lavender, of the faint, lingering sweetness of the apple pie his wife had baked the day before, of the clean, subtle aroma of wood polish, and the even fainter, almost imperceptible scent of the rain that had fallen that morning. It was the smell of safety, of comfort, of unwavering and unconditional love. It was a scent that seeped into his very being, calming him from the inside out, a sensory welcome that was more powerful than any spoken word. He stepped across the threshold, moving from the cool, crisp air of the outside world into the gentle, encompassing warmth of the house. The change in atmosphere was immediate and palpable. It was like stepping into a warm, gentle embrace, the house itself seeming to wrap its arms around him. He reached back, his hand finding the edge of the heavy wooden door, and pulled it closed behind him. The door swung shut with a quiet, solid whoosh of displaced air, its weight reassuring. He listened for the final sound, the one that sealed the transition, the one that truly marked his arrival. The latch clicked firmly into place, a sound of finality, of security. The world outside, with its fading light and its rustling leaves and its endless turning motion, was now separate from him. He was inside. He was home. A long, slow breath escaped his lips, a sigh that carried with it the last vestiges of the day's tensions. He felt the muscles in his shoulders, which he hadn't even realized were tensed, begin to relax and soften. It was here, within these four walls, that he was most truly himself. It was a sanctuary not just from the weather or the world, but from the relentless forward march of time itself. Here, surrounded by the quiet hum of a house at peace, he could simply be. A profound and silent wave of contentment washed over him, a quiet and deeply felt gratitude for this simple, beautiful, ordinary moment. The journey was over. The evening could begin. He moved from the hushed stillness of the entryway, his steps carrying him across the threshold into the living room, a space that seemed to breathe with a gentle, golden light. The air here was warmer, thicker with the silent stories of the day that had been lived within its walls. His eyes, now adjusted to the soft interior glow, traced the familiar lines of the room, from the tall, silent bookshelves that reached almost to the ceiling, their spines a mosaic of muted colors, to the low, comfortable sofa that sat expectantly in the center of a plush, deep-piled rug. His destination was a small table that stood beside a wing-backed armchair, its surface of dark, polished wood holding nothing but a single, shallow tray. The tray was carved from a lighter wood, its grain a swirling pattern of caramel and honey, and it waited, as it did every evening, to receive the small mundane artifacts of his day. It was a simple object, a gift from his wife many years ago, chosen for its simplicity and its warmth, and it had become an integral part of this quiet, end-of-day ritual. He walked towards it, his movements slow and deliberate, a stark contrast to the hurried pace the world outside so often demanded. Reaching the table, he paused, his hand dipping into the pocket of his trousers. The familiar weight and jangle of his keys met his fingers, the cold metal a small final link to the world of locks and doors, of comings and goings. He drew them out, the cluster of brass and steel catching the lamplight for a brief, glittering moment before he lowered them. He did not drop them. He placed them carefully into the wooden tray. The sound they made was not a crash, but a soft, melodic clatter, a series of distinct metallic notes that sang out briefly in the quiet room before being absorbed by the wood and the silence. It was the first sound he had made since closing the door, a small, deliberate announcement of his presence. Next came his wallet, the worn leather soft and supple in his hand. He placed it beside the keys, and the sound it made was entirely different, a soft, muted thud, the sound of something solid and yielding coming to rest. There they lay, the keys and the wallet, the two essential tools of his public life, now relinquished, their duties for the day concluded. They rested together in the shallow wooden vessel, contained and peaceful, their quiet presence a testament to the boundary that had now been drawn between the world outside and the sanctuary within. Now unburdened of the contents of his pockets, he turned his attention to the heaviest garment he wore, the coat that had served as his shield against the evening's chill. He stood in the center of the room, a silent and still figure in the warm, encompassing light. The coat felt heavy on his shoulders, a weight that was more than just the sum of its fabric and stitching. It was the weight of the day, of the responsibilities he shouldered, of the persona he wore for the world beyond his front door. He brought his hands up to the front of the coat, his fingers finding the first of the large, smooth buttons. It was cool to the touch, a small disc of polished horn. He worked it free from its hole, his movements unhurried and mindful. One by one he undid the buttons, a slow descending path, each release a small act of liberation. The front of the coat fell open, and he could feel the subtle shift in the air against his shirt, the warmth of the room now able to touch him more directly. He shrugged his shoulders, a gentle rolling motion, and allowed the heavy garment to slide from his frame. He caught it with his hands as it fell, the thick woolen fabric bunching softly. The immediate sensation was one of lightness, a palpable and profound release. The physical weight was gone, and with it, a corresponding emotional weight seemed to lift as well, dissipating into the quiet air of the room. He held the coat for a moment, its familiar heft now in his hands rather than on his back. He looked at it, this outer shell, this uniform of the day, before he began to fold it. He laid one side over the other, his hands smoothing the fabric, his motions practiced and neat. He then folded it in half, creating a tidy, dark rectangle of wool. He turned to the armchair, the one that sat beside the small table, its cushions plump and inviting. He leaned forward and laid the folded coat gently over the arm of the chair. It rested there, a dark, sleeping shape, its watch for the day officially over. It would wait there, patiently, until the morning, when the ritual would be performed in reverse. But for now it was at rest, and so he felt was a part of him. His gaze fell to his feet, to the sturdy leather shoes that had carried him through the day's long journey. They felt suddenly foreign in this room of softness and comfort, their rigid structure and tightly bound laces a final, lingering constraint. He moved towards the sofa, its soft, fabric-covered form a promise of comfort. He did not collapse into it, but rather sat gently on its edge, his posture still straight, his focus turning inward to this next small but significant act of unwinding. The world seemed to shrink for a moment, his entire awareness converging on the simple, intricate knots of his shoelaces. He bent forward, his hands moving to the first shoe. The laces were thin and dark, pulled taut by the day's long wear. His fingers, deft and certain, found the ends of the bow and gave a gentle, steady pull. He watched as the knot unraveled, the loops collapsing, the tension dissolving in an instant. He then took hold of the now loose ends and pulled them through the eyelets one by one, loosening the shoe's firm grip on his foot. The small whispering sound of the laces sliding against the leather was the only sound in the room. He repeated the process with the other shoe, another small ritual of release, another knot carefully undone. With both shoes now loose, he placed his hands on his heels and pushed them forward. He felt his feet slide free from their confines, the sensation one of pure, unadulterated relief. A long, inaudible sigh seemed to travel through him, a current of ease that started at the soles of his feet and worked its way up his entire body. He set the shoes neatly on the floor beside the sofa, side by side, like two loyal guards now off duty. And then he did the simplest, most satisfying thing of all. He curled his toes, stretching them, and rested his stockinged feet flat against the deep, welcoming softness of the rug. The thick plush fibers yielded beneath them, a sensation of such profound comfort that he closed his eyes for a moment, simply to savor it. It was a feeling of being truly grounded, of being connected to the very foundation of his peaceful haven. A deeper quiet seemed to call to him now, a more profound level of comfort that awaited in the upper reaches of the house. He rose from the sofa, his movements feeling lighter, freer, without the weight of his coat and shoes. He crossed the living room, his stockinged feet making no sound at all on the soft surface of the rug. He reached the foot of the staircase, a gentle curving structure of wood and carpet that led to the private sleeping quarters of the home. He placed his hand on the banister, the wood smooth and cool and solid beneath his palm, its surface polished to a soft sheen by the countless hands that had glided over it through the years. He began to ascend, his steps sinking into the thick carpet runner that softened each footfall into absolute silence. It was a journey he had made 1,000 times, yet it never lost its quiet significance. It was a movement not just upwards in space, but inwards in spirit, a transition from the shared communal areas of the home to the inner sanctum of rest and privacy. As he climbed, the quality of the light began to change. The golden glow of the living room lamps gave way to an even softer, more intimate luminescence that spilled from the open doorway at the top of the stairs. It was a light that did not seek to illuminate everything, but rather to suggest, to soften edges, to create pools of gentle brightness and long, peaceful shadows. The air, too, seemed different up here. It was still and warm, carrying a faint, clean scent of linen and cedar from the closets. With each silent step, he felt the last, lingering vestiges of the outside world fall further and further away, left behind on the floor below. He was moving toward the heart of the quiet, the epicenter of the house's serene and slumbering soul. He reached the top of the stairs and stepped onto the landing, the soft carpet continuing under his feet. The light drew him forward, a gentle and unspoken invitation. He walked down the short hallway toward the bedroom, his destination, the final stage of this slow and sacred process of return. He entered the bedroom and the peaceful atmosphere enveloped him completely. A single lamp was on, sitting on the bedside table, its shade of pale cream diffusing the light into a warm, gentle wash that did not quite reach the far corners of the room, leaving them in a soft and comforting gloom. The bed was turned down, the crisp white sheets and the heavy, comforting quilt forming an inviting landscape of rest. On the foot of the bed, laid out with care, was a change of clothes. They were not new or formal, but old and beloved friends, a thick woolen sweater the color of deep forest moss, and a pair of simple soft trousers in a shade of dark gray. They waited for him, a silent offering of ultimate comfort. He moved to the side of the bed and began to undress, removing the starched collared shirt and the tailored trousers he had worn for the day. He folded them neatly and placed them on a nearby chair, to be dealt with in the morning. For a moment, he stood simply in the quiet, warm air before reaching for the clothes that awaited him. He picked up the sweater first, the wool incredibly soft and heavy in his hands. He pulled it over his head, and the sensation was one of being instantly, completely enveloped in warmth. The soft fibers touched his skin, a gentle, comforting embrace that seemed to insulate him, not just from the cold, but from everything. He pulled on the trousers, their soft, worn fabric yielding and unrestrictive. The transition was complete. He was no longer a man dressed for the world, but a man dressed for his own home, for his own comfort, for the quiet and peaceful hours of the evening that stretched before him. He ran his hands down the soft wool of the sweater, a feeling of deep and abiding contentment settling over him like the gentlest of weights. He had shed the layers of the day, and in their place had clothed himself in the simple, profound, and unequivocal feeling of being home. Now wrapped in the soft armor of his comfortable clothes, he descended the staircase, each step taking him back down into the warm, golden heart of the house. The journey down was different from the journey up. The ascent had been a shedding of layers, a purposeful retreat. This descent was a re-emergence, a return to the quiet living space, not as an arrival from the outside world, but as a true inhabitant of this peaceful kingdom. His stockinged feet made no sound on the carpeted stairs, and as he stepped back onto the polished wooden floor of the living room, the silence that greeted him felt deeper, more personal. He was no longer a visitor in it, but a part of it, his own quiet presence now seamlessly woven into the tranquil fabric of the house. He stood for a long moment at the foot of the stairs, simply allowing his senses to reacquaint themselves with the room from this new perspective of complete comfort and belonging. His gaze traveled slowly, not inspecting, but simply absorbing. It was a visual pilgrimage through a landscape he knew by heart, yet one that always offered new small wonders in the shifting light. The shelves that flanked the fireplace were crowded with books, their spines a chaotic but harmonious collection of colors and fonts. They were not mere decorations, they were companions, vessels of stories and ideas that had filled countless quiet evenings. His eyes drifted over them, recognizing the familiar titles, the worn corners of old favorites, the brighter, crisper spines of newer acquisitions. He saw the way the soft, buttery light from the single lamp fell across them, catching the gold lettering on one, casting the deep blue spine of another into a gentle shadow. On the arm of the sofa, a thick hand-knitted blanket was draped in a cascade of soft woolen folds, its cream-colored yarn looking impossibly soft and inviting. He could almost feel its comforting weight just by looking at it, a silent promise of warmth and coziness for later in the evening. The lamplight worked a kind of gentle magic on the room, softening every line, smoothing every hard edge, transforming ordinary furniture into shapes of profound comfort and peace. It deepened the shadows in the corners, making the room feel both more intimate and somehow larger. A secluded world unto itself, insulated from the night that was now pressing against the window panes. His attention was drawn, as it often was, to the fireplace. It stood at the far end of the room, a solid, reassuring structure of dark red brick, its hearth swept clean and waiting patiently for the first fire of the season. It was the silent, steady heart of the room, a focal point even when dormant. In the profound quiet of the house, another sound now made itself known, one so constant and familiar that it often faded into the background of his consciousness. From a shadowed corner of the room, the gentle, rhythmic ticking of a tall grandfather clock measured out the seconds with a steady, unhurried grace. Tick-tock, tick-tock. It was not an intrusive sound. It was the house's own heartbeat, a calm and reassuring pulse that had marked the passing of quiet, peaceful moments for as long as he could remember. The sound was a thread of continuity, a gentle anchor in the sea of stillness, reminding him that time here did not rush or demand, but flowed like a slow, deep river. The steady rhythm of the clock seemed to synchronize with his own breathing, deepening his sense of tranquility, pulling him further into the present moment. He felt a gentle pull toward the hearth, an almost magnetic attraction. He moved across the room, his bare feet silent on the thick, soft rug, the fibers yielding pleasantly under his weight. He came to a stop before the fireplace, standing on the cool, smooth slate of the hearthstone. The bricks were dark and cool to the touch, each one slightly different in texture and hue, a testament to the hands that had laid them so many years ago. He reached out and rested his palm against them for a moment, feeling their solid, earthy coldness. Then his gaze lifted to the mantelpiece above, a thick, heavy beam of dark, aged wood that spanned the width of the fireplace. It was the room's altar, a place for cherished objects and captured memories. He ran his fingers along its surface, a slow, appreciative caress. The wood was not perfectly smooth. It had a texture, a grain, a history. He could feel the slight ridges and valleys of the wood grain, the almost imperceptible roughness that spoke of its organic nature. It felt solid, real, and enduring beneath his fingertips, a piece of the forest brought indoors to stand guard over the hearth. As he stood there, he drew in a long, slow breath, letting the unique scent of the room fill his lungs. It was a complex and subtle perfume, a fragrance woven from the quiet life of the house. He could distinguish the faint, clean, and slightly sweet scent of the beeswax polish he used on the wooden furniture, an aroma that spoke of care and preservation. It mingled with another, more elusive scent that emanated from the fireplace itself. It was the ghostly, almost imperceptible smell of cold smoke, the lingering memory of countless fires that had burned there through the colder months. It was not a harsh or unpleasant smell, but a nostalgic one, a trace of wood smoke and ash that carried with it the feeling of winter nights, of warmth in the face of the cold, of stories told before a dancing flame. These scents, the beeswax and the old smoke, combined to create an atmosphere of profound and timeless domesticity. It was the smell of a house that was not just a structure but a home, a place where life was lived, and memories were made and carefully preserved. His eyes, which had been closed for a moment as he focused on the scent, now opened and came to rest on the collection of framed photographs that were arranged with loving care along the length of the mantelpiece. They were a constellation of frozen moments, a silent gallery of his life's most cherished chapters. There were pictures of his children when they were small, their faces bright with laughter, their hair tousled by the wind on a long-ago summer day. There was a formal portrait from his own wedding day, two young people looking out at the camera, with eyes full of hope and a future that was still a beautiful unwritten story. Each photograph was a doorway to a different time, a different feeling, a different version of himself. But his gaze did not linger on these. It was drawn, as it so often was, to a single particular frame that sat slightly apart from the others, given a place of quiet honor. It was not a formal portrait, but a candid snapshot, taken on a brilliant autumn afternoon many years ago. The photograph captured him and his wife, standing close together under the sprawling branches of a maple tree. The background was a soft, impressionistic blur of orange, red, and yellow leaves, a perfect tapestry of the season. They were smiling, not for a camera but at each other. His arm was around her waist, pulling her close, and her head was tilted slightly, resting against his shoulder. Her smile was radiant, reaching all the way to her eyes, which were crinkled at the corners with genuine joy. He was looking down at her, his own expression one of open, unabashed adoration. The sunlight, filtering through the vibrant canopy above, dappled their faces, catching in her hair and illuminating the sheer, simple happiness of the moment. It was a picture that captured not just an image, but an emotion. It was the visual representation of a feeling he had carried in his heart for decades, a quiet, steadfast, and deeply rooted love. He felt an irresistible urge to hold the moment closer, to feel its weight and substance in his hands. He reached out with both hands, his movements careful and reverent, and lifted the photograph from its place on the mantel. The frame was made of a simple, dark wood, and it felt heavy and solid in his grasp, its familiar weight a comforting and grounding presence. He brought it closer, his eyes focusing on the details he knew so well but never tired of seeing. The way a strand of her hair had escaped and was blowing gently across her cheek, the specific shade of blue in the scarf she wore, a perfect complement to the fiery leaves behind them. He held the frame gently, his thumbs resting on the bottom edge, his fingers curled around the back. It was more than just wood and glass and paper. It was a vessel, a container for a perfect, captured piece of time. With the utmost tenderness, a gesture that was almost unconscious, he raised one hand and traced the outline of her face in the photograph with the tip of his index finger. His finger moved slowly, not quite touching the glass, hovering just above the surface as if to avoid disturbing the sacred image beneath. He followed the gentle curve of her cheek, the line of her smile, the shape of her eyes. It was a gesture of profound affection, a quiet conversation with a memory. As his finger completed its phantom caress, a powerful wave of warmth bloomed in the center of his chest. It was a feeling that was both emotional and physical, a sudden radiant heat that spread through him, loosening something tight and unspoken within his soul. It was the warmth of love, pure and undiluted, a feeling as vibrant and real in that quiet living room as it had been on that sun-drenched autumn afternoon years ago. This simple, silent interaction with the photograph had opened a door. The image was the key, and the memory it guarded was now beginning to stir, to rise from the depths of his heart, ready to unfold. Holding the framed photograph in his hands, he felt its weight, not as a burden, but as an anchor to the profound and beautiful feeling that had bloomed within him. The warmth in his chest was a quiet, steady glow, a gentle internal hearth that mirrored the potential for warmth in the silent fireplace before him. He did not want to let go of the feeling, but he knew he could not stand there all night, a silent sentinel in his own living room. The comfort of the house was not just in its objects and its light, but in its invitation to rest, to settle, to be still. With this thought, he turned away from the mantelpiece, his movements slow and imbued with a sense of gentle purpose. He crossed the soft expanse of the rug, his destination the large, welcoming sofa that waited patiently in the center of the room, its cushions plump and deep, promising a soft and yielding embrace. He reached the low wooden coffee table that sat before the sofa, its surface polished to a dark, reflective sheen. He leaned forward, his body bending from the waist in a slow, graceful arc, and prepared to set the photograph down. He did not simply place it flat. With a careful and deliberate touch, he stood the frame on its edge, and then leaned it gently against a small stack of heavy, hardcover books that served as a decorative and functional centerpiece. He adjusted its position, tilting it just so, ensuring that the smiling image of his wife was angled directly towards the spot on the sofa where he intended to sit. It was a small act of curation, of arranging his environment to hold this particular memory, this particular feeling at its very center. The photograph now stood as a quiet audience, a smiling witness to the peaceful evening he was about to inhabit. Having positioned the memory to his satisfaction, he was ready to embrace the comfort that awaited him. He turned and sank down into the sofa, the cushions sighing softly as they received his weight. The sensation was one of pure, unadulterated comfort, a feeling of being held and supported. He settled back, his spine pressing into the soft but firm backrest, his body finding the familiar contours of his favorite spot. For a moment, he just sat there, breathing in the quiet air, his hands resting on his knees, but a final layer of comfort called to him. His eyes fell upon the cream-colored knitted blanket that was draped over the arm of the sofa, the very one he had admired upon entering the room. It looked even more inviting up close, its thick braided stitches promising a substantial and gentle warmth. He reached out, his fingers sinking into the soft wool. It was heavy, heavier than it looked, and the texture was rustic and pleasing against his skin. He took hold of a corner and gently shook the blanket open. It unfolded with a soft, whispering sound, a slow-motion cascade of wool that filled the air for a moment before settling. He guided it over his body, drawing the soft fabric up over his legs, his lap, and his waist, tucking the edges in around him. The weight of the blanket was immediate and profoundly calming. It was not a restrictive weight, but a grounding one, a gentle, reassuring pressure that seemed to soothe his very nervous system. A slow creeping warmth began to seep through the layers of his clothing, a gradual and delicious heat that started in his legs and slowly began to spread upwards, chasing away any lingering hint of the evening's chill. It was the final piece of the ritual, the last act in the careful construction of this perfect, peaceful moment. He was now fully ensconced, a man in his own castle, protected by layers of comfort, both physical and emotional. His gaze returned one last time to the photograph on the table. In the soft lamplight, the image seemed to glow with an inner life. Her smile, captured all those years ago, felt immediate and present, a silent communication across the gulf of time. He looked at her smiling face, and a reciprocal smile touched his own lips, faint and gentle. He was not just looking at a picture, he was looking at the source of a happiness so deep and so abiding that it had become the very foundation of his world. He held her gaze for a long, silent moment, a conversation of the heart that required no words. Then, with a feeling of complete and utter peace settling into his soul, he drew in a long, slow, and deeply satisfying breath. He inhaled the quiet scent of the room, the faint aroma of old books and beeswax, and the soft, clean smell of the woolen blanket. He held the breath for a second, savoring the feeling of his lungs filled with the air of his own sanctuary. And then he exhaled. It was a slow, complete release, a sigh of pure contentment that seemed to carry with it the very last atom of tension from his body. As the last of the air left his lungs, he allowed his eyelids to drift downward, heavy and slow, like two soft curtains being drawn at the end of a perfect day. The golden light of the room was extinguished, replaced by the gentle, velvety darkness behind his closed eyes. It was not a void, but a canvas, a quiet, private space where the world of the senses could give way to the world of the mind. The transition was soft, seamless. He rested his head back against the cushions, the weight of the blanket a comforting pressure on his legs, his body completely still, completely at rest. He had arrived at the center of the quiet, the very heart of the peace he had been seeking since he had turned the key in his car to begin his journey home. For a moment, The only sound that registered in his consciousness was the steady, rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Tick, tock, tick, tock. It had been his anchor, the gentle heartbeat of the house. But now, as he sank deeper into his state of relaxation, a strange and subtle shift began to occur. The sound of the clock, which had been so clear and present, began to recede. It grew fainter, as if the clock itself were slowly walking away from him, its rhythmic pulse dissolving into a more distant, less distinct beat. He was letting go of the present, drifting away from the shores of the here and now. As the sound of the ticking faded into an almost inaudible whisper, a new sound began to emerge from the depths of the quiet darkness. It was faint at first, a low, indistinct thrumming, the kind of sound one feels as much as hears. It was the muffled bass of music, the rhythmic pulse of a beat that was happening somewhere far away or long ago. Then other sounds began to weave their way into this auditory tapestry. The high, bright sound of laughter. Not a single person, but a group, their collective joy a shimmering, ghostly echo. There was the murmur of voices, too distant to make out individual words, but their cadence was light and cheerful. And then a new layer of sensation began to bleed into the darkness. A scent. It was the crisp, slightly sweet and earthy smell of dry autumn leaves, the very essence of an October night. It was quickly joined by another, more specific fragrance, the warm, slightly smoky and sweet scent of candle wax, the unmistakable aroma of 100 carved pumpkins, their inner lights flickering in the dark. The stage was being set. The living room was dissolving, and in its place a different scene, a different time was beginning to assemble itself in the vast, quiet theatre of his mind. The gentle darkness behind his closed eyelids was a vast and silent stage, and upon it, the ghostly scenery of the past began to assemble itself with a slow and patient certainty. The faint, muffled thrumming grew in volume, resolving itself into the deep rhythmic pulse of a bass line, a low and steady beat that vibrated not in his ears, but deep within his bones, a physical sensation that resonated up through the floorboards of a long-vanished room. The phantom scents of autumn leaves and warm candle wax grew stronger, more defined, and were joined now by the cloyingly sweet aroma of cheap fruit punch and the faint, almost buttery smell of popcorn. The indistinct murmur of voices sharpened, fracturing into the bright, sharp peaks of individual laughter, the chaotic but cheerful din of a house filled to bursting with exuberant, youthful energy. The living room, with its soft lamplight and its profound quiet, dissolved completely, its reality fading like a dream upon waking, and in its place, another room, another time, another life, solidified around him. He was a boy again, or at least a version of himself so young he felt like a stranger. He stood with his shoulders pressed against a wall papered with a pattern he vaguely disliked, a temporary anchor in a churning sea of bodies. The room was a study in planned chaos, a living room that had surrendered its adult identity for a single night of teenage revelry. Fake, cottony spiderwebs were stretched thin across every corner, their sticky strands catching the low light and glistening like threads of sugar. Crinkly paper streamers, in alternating bands of pumpkin orange and midnight black, were strung from the ceiling, dipping and swaying in the currents of warm air stirred by the dancing crowd. The light was dim, a perpetual twilight cast by a few strategically placed lamps, whose bulbs had been replaced with orange ones, and the flickering, unsteady glow from a legion of carved pumpkins that sat grinning on every available surface. It was a space that was trying very hard to be spooky, but which had only succeeded in being overwhelmingly, claustrophobically alive. The music was a relentless physical presence, a muffled but powerful beat that drove the motion of the room, a tribal rhythm for this gathering of costumed strangers. In his hand, he held a cup, a vessel of lurid, fire-engine red plastic. It was slick with condensation, the chill of the iced beverage within seeping through the thin material and making his fingers feel numb and clumsy. He could feel the tiny droplets of moisture on his skin, a minor persistent discomfort that seemed to mirror the larger, more pervasive discomfort he felt in his own soul. He was a spectator, an island in the stream, his back literally against the wall as he watched the frantic, joyful pageant unfold before him. The small space was a whirlwind of identities, a masquerade of the familiar. He saw a boy from his history class, now draped in a white sheet with crudely cut eye holes, a classic and uninspired ghost. He saw a trio of girls from the cheerleading squad, their faces pale with white makeup, with plastic fangs and theatrical drops of fake blood at the corners of their mouths. A hulking figure with a hockey mask, a character from some slasher film, pushed past him, followed by a girl in a shimmering, brightly colored outfit, a superhero of some kind. It was a chaotic and noisy parade of the uncanny, a room full of people he knew, but who were, for this one night, pretending to be anything but themselves. And he, in his simple, dark clothes, without a mask or a costume, felt like the most disguised person of all, hiding in plain sight. His eyes scanned the room, a lazy, panning gaze that was not searching for anything in particular, but was simply trying to find a place to rest, a point of interest in the overwhelming sensory input. He felt a profound sense of detachment, the kind of deep and weary boredom that only a teenager, trying to appear nonchalant at a party, can truly understand. He watched the dancers in the center of the room, a writhing mass of limbs and laughter, their movements jerky and uncoordinated in the strobing, uncertain light. He watched the small groups huddled in the corners, their heads close together, sharing secrets and jokes that were lost in the general din. He took a small sip from his cup, the sugary, lukewarm liquid doing nothing to quench the strange thirst of his boredom. He felt a vague, unformed yearning for something to happen, for some small event to break the suffocating monotony of the evening, to give him a reason to be there, a story to tell later. But he did not expect it. He simply waited, an anonymous observer in a room full of noise, his gaze drifting aimlessly over the shifting sea of faces and masks. And then, it happened. Not with a crash of thunder or a sudden dramatic silence, but in a small miraculous parting of the crowd. For a brief, insignificant second, a pathway opened in the throng of people, a momentary clearing in the human forest, and his eyes, which had been seeing everything and nothing, were drawn through that opening as if by an invisible thread. Across the room, bathed in the soft, flickering glow of a single large jack-o'-lantern that sat on a low table beside her, he saw a girl. She was dressed as a witch, a classic and simple choice, yet there was nothing cliché about her. She wore a long dark dress that seemed to drink the shadows, and on her head sat a tall pointed hat, its brim casting a soft gloom over the upper part of her face. But the costume was merely the frame. The masterpiece was the person within it. The unsteady light of the candle inside the pumpkin threw a warm, living glow upward onto her face, illuminating her features in a way that felt both ancient and immediate. It was a painter's light, a light that carved her out of the darkness, highlighting the gentle curve of her cheek, the soft line of her jaw, the quiet intelligence in her eyes. In that instant, the world tilted on its axis. The relentless, thumping bass of the music did not stop, but it faded, receding into a distant, irrelevant hum, the sound of a storm happening many miles away. The cacophony of laughter and shouting voices blended into a single, monotonous drone, a background noise that had no more meaning than the sound of the wind. The chaotic, strobing lights of the party seemed to dim, to shrink, until the only source of illumination left in the entire universe was the single, gentle flame of that one candle, and the way it danced upon her skin. The cold, wet plastic of the cup in his hand ceased to register. His own body, his own sense of self seemed to dissolve, his entire consciousness collapsing into a single, focused point. Her. She was not dancing, not laughing loudly. She was simply standing there, listening to someone beside her, and she was smiling. It was a serene smile, a small, gentle curve of her lips that seemed completely at odds with the frantic energy of the room around her. It was a smile of genuine, unforced amusement, a quiet island of calm in the middle of a chaotic ocean. He felt something shift deep within him, a tectonic movement in the landscape of his young soul. It was not the cheap, frantic flutter of a teenage crush. It was a feeling that was deeper, calmer, and infinitely more profound. It was a feeling of recognition. It was as if he had been walking through a fog his entire life, and in that one startling moment, the fog had cleared, and he was seeing the sky for the first time. He saw a kindness in her eyes, a gentleness in her posture, a quiet confidence in her stillness that called to something deep within himself that he didn't even know existed. He felt an inexplicable and undeniable sense of peace settle over him, a profound and sudden calm that was the very antithesis of the party's manufactured excitement. The vague, restless searching he had been feeling all night, and perhaps for his whole life up to that point, simply ceased. The search was over. He had not known what he was looking for, but his heart, with an unerring and shocking certainty, knew that it had been found. That was the moment. the true beginning. The quiet, earth-shattering instant when the memory was forged, burned into his mind, not as a series of events, but as a single, perfect and unchanging feeling. His awareness, which had been a wide and unfocused net cast over the entire chaotic scene, now began to draw itself in, pulling its edges tight until it formed a single, powerful beam of concentrated perception. Everything in the periphery of his vision softened and blurred, the dancing figures and gesticulating ghosts becoming indistinct, impressionistic smudges of color and motion. The only thing that remained sharp, the only thing that was truly real, was the small sacred space she occupied across the room. The light from the candle inside the jack-o'-lantern was a living thing, a soft and restless flame that made the shadows behind her dance and sway. It was a warm and gentle light, a world away from the harsh artificial orange bulbs that lit the rest of the party. It licked at the edges of her dark costume, giving it a subtle glowing outline, and it bathed her face in a constant flickering caress of gold and amber. He watched, mesmerized, as the unsteady light played across her features, sometimes illuminating her entirely, sometimes letting a soft shadow fall across one cheek, making her seem both mysterious and completely breathtakingly present. This intimate, personal light seemed to find and amplify the natural light that already existed within her. When she smiled, the warm glow of the candle seemed to be merely a reflection of a brighter, more profound illumination that came from somewhere deep inside. It was in the way her eyes, even from across the room, seemed to catch and hold the flame, a tiny, brilliant spark igniting in their depths with every flicker. He could not tell what color they were from this distance, only that they were bright and full of a quiet, intelligent mirth. Her smile was not a wide, boisterous thing, but a gentle, knowing curve of her lips that seemed to be the source of all the warmth in that corner of the room, a small and steady fire that held the chaotic darkness at bay. His eyes traced the line of her pointed hat, the soft fall of her hair, and then he noticed it, a small and insignificant detail that suddenly felt like the most important thing in the world. Around her neck, on a delicate chain, hung a small silver pendant. As she shifted her weight slightly, the pendant swung forward, and for a single, breathtaking instant, it caught the candlelight perfectly. It flashed, a tiny, brilliant star against the deep darkness of her dress, before vanishing again into the soft gloom. It was a secret signal, a tiny, silent bell that had rung just for him. The roaring ocean of the party's noise was a physical pressure against his eardrums, a constant and meaningless barrage of sound. But now, with his vision so intensely focused, his hearing began to follow suit. A strange and powerful intentionality took hold of him. He was no longer just hearing, he was listening. He strained, not with his ears, but with his entire being, trying to pierce through the thick wall of sound that separated him from her. He wanted, with a sudden and desperate urgency, to hear her voice. He willed the thumping music to subside, the shouted conversations to fade, the shrieks of laughter to quiet themselves, and for a moment it was as if they did. The dense wall of sound seemed to become porous, and a tiny, precious sliver of audio managed to travel across the room and find him. The person she was with, a tall figure in a pirate costume, must have said something amusing. Her smile, which had been serene and gentle, suddenly blossomed. Her shoulders shook slightly and she brought a hand up to her mouth for a moment, and then he heard it. It was not loud. It was not boisterous. It was a laugh that was as clear and as pure as the sound of a small bell rung in a silent, snow-filled forest. It was a soft, melodious cascade of notes that seemed to exist on a completely different frequency from the crude, loud noises of the rest of the room. It cut through the din, not with volume, but with its sheer, unblemished quality. The sound was a perfect match for the light he saw on her face, for the gentle serenity of her smile. It was a sound that was full of genuine warmth and an easy, unaffected grace. It was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. It rippled through him, a physical sensation that was both calming and electrifying. The sound confirmed everything his eyes had already told him. This was a person whose exterior beauty was merely a quiet and graceful introduction to the even greater beauty that resided within. That single, soft peal of laughter was a hook that caught him in the soul, pulling him even further away from the shores of his own quiet corner and deeper into the irresistible gravity of her orbit. With his eyes and ears now completely captivated, his other senses began a quiet rebellion, realigning themselves to this new and singular reality. The air in the room was thick with a chemical soup of adolescent smells. The sticky, sweet, vaguely citrus aroma of the punch in his cup, the faint, dusty smell of old furniture, the plasticky scent of cheap masks and decorations, all mingling into a generic and uninspiring fog. But his mind, now a finely tuned instrument of perception, began to filter. It dismissed the irrelevant smells, pushing them to the background until they were no more than a vague and distant memory. The only scent that his consciousness allowed to register was the one that emanated from the pool of light where she stood. It was the warm, earthy, and profoundly comforting smell of the baked pumpkin, a fragrance that was both sweet and savory. It mingled with the simpler, cleaner scent of the slowly melting candle wax, a warm and gentle perfume that smelled of stillness and light. This combination, this unique and specific fragrance of warm pumpkin and candlelight, became inextricably linked to her in his mind. It was the scent of her, the very atmosphere she carried with her, and for the rest of his life the smell of a Halloween pumpkin would be a secret and sacred doorway back to this very moment. And as this new sensory world solidified around him, he became acutely, almost painfully aware of the object in his own hand. The red plastic cup, which he had been holding for what felt like an eternity, was suddenly a foreign and intrusive object. He felt its smooth, cold surface against his palm and fingers, the slickness of the condensation that had formed on its skin. The chill from the melting ice within seeped into him, a creeping numbness that was in stark and shocking contrast to the feeling that was simultaneously blooming in the center of his chest. For while his hand was cold, his heart was on fire. A wave of warmth, so powerful and so unexpected it almost made him gasp, was spreading through him from the inside out. It was a gentle, liquid heat, like a swallowed sunbeam, that radiated through his torso up into his throat and out into his limbs. It was a feeling of pure, unadulterated joy, a vibrant and silent explosion of emotion that was so overwhelming, so physically potent, that it demanded a response. The cold cup in his hand was the last piece of the old world, the world of boredom and detachment. The warmth in his chest was the first sign of the new world, a world that contained her. The dissonance between the two, the cold truth in his hand and the warm truth in his heart, created a powerful and undeniable current of energy within him. It was a feeling that could not be contained by standing still. All the disparate threads of his experience, all the scattered sensory data, now rushed together and converged into a single, overwhelming and perfectly clear realization. It was no longer a series of independent observations. The sight of her face in the candlelight, the silver pendant flashing like a distant star, the sound of her impossibly lovely laugh, the sacred scent of pumpkin and wax, the cold of the cup, the warmth in his soul, all of it merged. It synthesized in an instant into a single unified and unassailable truth. It was a truth that did not require logic or reason or debate. It was a truth that was felt in his very bones, a quiet and absolute imperative that rose from the deepest and most honest part of his being. The time for observation was over. The time for standing still, for being a spectator, had passed. His body knew it before his mind had even formed the words. His muscles tensed, not with anxiety but with anticipation. A single, silent and unshakable decision crystallized in his heart. It was the simplest and most terrifying decision of his young life. He had to cross the room. He had to close the distance that separated them. He had to know her. The path between his wall and her candlelit corner, which moments before had been an impassable jungle of dancing bodies, now looked clear and straight, a journey he knew, with an absolute and terrifying certainty, that he was already on. The journey began with a small, decisive act of severance. The red plastic cup, cold and slick with condensation, had become the physical manifestation of his inertia, a symbol of his passive observation. It was the last thing connecting him to the boy who had been leaning against the wall, bored and detached. He looked around for a place to divest himself of this final anchor, his eyes landing on a nearby end table cluttered with a precarious tower of empty cups and discarded napkins. He did not add his to the pile. Instead, he placed it carefully on a small, clear space on the wooden surface, a deliberate and gentle placement that felt more like a farewell than a disposal. With his hand now free, a subtle but significant shift occurred within him. He felt lighter, untethered, ready for the voyage. He turned his body, orienting himself, and fixed his gaze upon the warm, distant light that was his destination. She was his North Star, his unwavering point of reference in the swirling, chaotic galaxy of the party. And so, he began to walk. The room, which had seemed so small and claustrophobic from his stationary vantage point, now transformed into a vast and unpredictable landscape that had to be navigated. The crowd was a dense, living forest, and he had to thread his way through it. He moved not with aggression or haste, but with a quiet, fluid determination. A laughing couple, locked in an embrace, blocked his path, and he shifted his course, skirting around them like a river flowing around a smooth stone. A sudden surge in the dancing throng pushed a wave of people in his direction, and he paused for a second, a moment of stillness in the current, before finding a new opening and pressing forward. The thumping bass of the music was a physical force, a series of invisible walls that he had to push through. The air was thick and warm, heavy with the scent of perfume and punch, and the heat of too many bodies in a small space. Through it all, his focus never wavered. His eyes remained locked on her, a steady, unwavering gaze that cut through the visual noise of the strobing lights and the flailing limbs. The other people in the room became mere shadows, indistinct and unimportant shapes that drifted at the edges of his vision. He was a ship sailing through a storm, his eyes fixed on the single, steady light of a distant, welcoming lighthouse. It was a phenomenon that he would later think of as a small private miracle, a quiet conspiracy of fate working in his favor. As he drew closer, navigating the final few obstacles between them, the tall pirate, who had been the recipient of her beautiful laugh, gave a small bow, said something that made her smile one last time, and then turned and was swallowed by the crowd. The timing was so perfect, so utterly beyond the realm of coincidence, that it felt like a silent, divine intervention. One moment, she was occupied, a part of a shared conversation. The next, she was alone, a solitary figure standing in a perfect, self-contained circle of warm, flickering light. Her sudden solitude did not make her seem lonely or abandoned. Rather, it amplified her presence tenfold. It was as if the universe had cleared the stage just for his arrival. She was no longer just a person at a party. She was the very center of it, the quiet, magnetic core around which all the chaos silently turned. She turned her head slightly, her gaze drifting for a moment over the noisy spectacle of the room, her expression calm and contemplative, and in that instant, he closed the final few feet that separated them. He came to a stop before her, stepping out of the churning river of the crowd and into the quiet, protected eddy of her personal space. He had arrived. The transition was immediate and profound. The moment he entered the pool of candlelight that surrounded her, the clamor of the party seemed to fall away. The volume knob of the world turned down until the music and the laughter were nothing more than a distant, oceanic roar, a background hum that only served to emphasize the precious, palpable silence that now existed between them. He could feel the warmth from the candle on his skin, could smell the sweet earthy scent of the pumpkin more clearly than ever. For a long suspended moment that seemed to stretch into an eternity, they simply stood there looking at each other. He saw her eyes properly for the first time. They were a deep, warm brown, and they were even kinder and more intelligent up close than he could have possibly imagined. He opened his mouth to speak, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs, his carefully rehearsed opening lines vanishing into thin air. The first words that came out were simple, unadorned, and utterly honest. A quiet comment about her costume, how it suited her, how it felt more real than all the others. He watched, breathless, as the serene smile he had admired from across the room was directed, for the very first time, entirely at him. It was like watching the sun rise. Her whole face seemed to light up from within, a radiant, gentle warmth that chased away all of his nervousness, all of his fear. The smile reached her eyes, making them shine, and he felt his own lips curve in an involuntary, heartfelt response. Then she spoke, and her voice was the final, perfect piece of the puzzle falling into place. It was exactly as her laugh had promised it would be. It was not loud, but it was clear and confident, a gentle, melodic sound that was perfectly audible in their quiet bubble, despite the distant roar of the party. She responded to his comment, her own words simple and kind, and the sound of his own name on her lips was a quiet revelation. The conversation began. At first it was hesitant, a delicate dance of questions and answers, the careful exploratory steps of two strangers navigating the new and unfamiliar territory of each other's minds. But the initial awkwardness, the slight formal stiffness, melted away with an astonishing and beautiful rapidity. Within minutes, they were no longer strangers. The conversation found a rhythm, an easy, unforced cadence that felt as natural and as comfortable as breathing. They talked about the party, about school, about the books they liked to read, and the music they listened to when they were alone. They discovered, with a series of small, delighted smiles, a shared landscape of interests, a common ground of quiet passions and gentle observations. There were no awkward silences to fill, no desperate lunges for new topics. The words just flowed, each of them listening with a genuine and focused intensity, not just waiting for their own turn to speak. He felt a sense of ease with her that he had never experienced with anyone before. He felt, in a way that was both strange and wonderful, that he was not performing, not trying to be a clever or interesting version of himself. He was simply himself, and that, for the first time, felt like it was more than enough. He was completely captivated, not just by what she said, but by the way she said it, by the thoughtful expressions that crossed her face, by the small, graceful gestures of her hands as she spoke. The memory, in his mind, was not a continuous reel of the entire conversation. Instead, it was a collection of perfect, crystalline moments. But there was one moment that stood above all the others, a single perfect jewel that he had held in his heart for all these years. It came during a brief lull in their words. They had both turned, simultaneously and without discussion, to look out at the swirling chaos of the party they had so successfully walled themselves off from. They watched the frantic dancing, heard the loud, empty laughter, and saw the desperate, forced fun of it all. He had been about to make a small, cynical comment about it, the kind of thing a boy his age thought was clever. But before he could speak, she did. She said something quiet, a simple, gentle observation about how strange it all was, how everyone was trying so hard to be loud and seen, but how the quietest things in the room, like the steady flame of the candle at their feet, were the most beautiful. Her words were a perfect echo of the unformed thoughts in his own head. He turned to look at her, and she was already looking at him, and in her eyes he saw a perfect, shining reflection of his own soul. In that instant, a silent and profound communication passed between them. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated connection, a shared recognition that went far beyond their shared taste in books or music. They were two of a kind, two quiet people who had, by some impossible stroke of luck, found each other in the middle of a very loud room. A feeling of certainty, so powerful and so absolute it was like a physical impact, washed over him. It was a silent, internal explosion of warmth and light. It was not a thought, but a knowing, a deep, unshakable, and deeply calming knowledge that settled into the very marrow of his bones. This was it. This person, this moment, this feeling. This was not just a pleasant conversation at a party. This was the beginning of everything. The vivid, vibrant world of the past did not vanish in an instant. It did not shatter like glass or evaporate like smoke. Instead, it receded with a slow and gentle grace, like a tide pulling away from a quiet shore. The insistent, thumping pulse of the music, which had been the heartbeat of his memory, began to thin, its rhythm stretching out, each beat growing fainter and more distant, until it was nothing more than a ghostly, fading echo in the far corners of his mind. The bright, chaotic tapestry of voices, the laughter and the shouted conversations, unraveled thread by thread, their colors fading, their substance dissolving into a soft, indistinct murmur that soon gave way to a profound and welcoming silence. The warm, sweet scent of pumpkin and candle wax, which had been so immediate and so real, began to dissipate, replaced by the cleaner, more familiar fragrance of his own quiet home. He was returning, a slow and peaceful journey back across the years, and the first sensation to greet him from the present was the comforting, substantial weight of the woolen blanket across his legs. It was a grounding presence, a gentle anchor pulling him back to the here and now. And then another sound surfaced from the deep quiet, the steadfast and familiar rhythm of the grandfather clock in the corner, its steady tick-tock, a quiet, welcome home. He remained for a moment longer in the soft, velvety darkness behind his closed eyelids, suspended in the peaceful space between two worlds. He was aware now of the gentle rise and fall of his own chest, of the soft fabric of his sweater against his skin, of the way the sofa cushions held and supported him. He was back in his own body, in his own time, in his own sanctuary. The memory had been a beautiful and welcome visitor, but now it had taken its leave, leaving behind not an emptiness, but a profound and lingering warmth, a quiet and radiant afterglow that filled his entire being. With a sense of complete and unhurried peace, he allowed his eyelids to flutter and then slowly to drift open. The world returned to him in a soft, gentle wave. At first there was only light and indistinct shape, the warm golden glow of the living room lamp a soft and blurry haze. His vision was unfocused, still veiled by the mists of his deep reverie. He blinked once, slowly, and the world began to sharpen, the soft edges coalescing into familiar, beloved lines. His gaze, without any conscious direction, came to rest on the coffee table before him. And there it was, the photograph, the dark, simple wooden frame, the glint of the lamplight on the protective glass, and the image within. He saw her face, the face he had just seen illuminated by candlelight in the chaos of a long-ago party, now looking out at him from a sun-drenched autumn afternoon. The witch of his memory was the woman of his life. The two images, the young girl with the serene smile and the radiant woman captured in this later, happier moment, fused into one seamless, perfect whole in his mind. The past and the present converged, the long, beautiful line of their life together, drawn taut and clear between those 2 points in time. Seeing her smile in the photograph, now so deeply enriched by the memory of its very first dawning, was not just a reminder of his love for her. It was a profound affirmation of the entire journey, a confirmation that the impossible, beautiful feeling that had sparked to life in his teenage heart had not been a fleeting fancy, but the truest and most enduring thing he would ever know. A feeling, vast and deep and silent, rose up within him. It was a wave of such immense and overwhelming gratitude that it was a physical presence, a gentle, swelling pressure in his chest that made it almost difficult to breathe. It was a monologue that unfolded in his heart, a silent, reverent speech that needed no words, for its language was pure, unadulterated feeling. He felt a profound and humbling awe at the sheer, breathtaking improbability of it all, the infinite branching paths of life, the billion-to-one chances, the countless tiny, insignificant decisions made by two separate people that had, by some miracle of cosmic alignment, led them both to the same crowded room on the same autumn night. He thought of the golden thread he had felt pulling him across that room, and he now saw that thread for what it was. It had not just been a thread for a single evening. It had been the beginning of the entire tapestry. It was the first, single, shimmering strand from which the whole rich and beautiful fabric of his life had been woven. He thought of their wedding day, the feeling of her hand in his, the quiet certainty in her eyes that had mirrored his own. He thought of the day they had brought their first child home, the terrifying and beautiful weight of that new life, a love so fierce and so new it had reshaped the world. He thought of 1,000 ordinary mornings, the shared ritual of coffee, the comfortable silence of two people who knew each other's souls. He thought of evenings just like this one, spent in the quiet comfort of this very room, the house filled with the sounds of their children's laughter. All of it, every cherished memory, every hard-won joy, every moment of quiet contentment could be traced back, in an unbroken line, to that one single, silent decision to cross a room and say hello to a girl in a witch's costume. The sheer, dumb luck of it, the staggering, beautiful fortune was a weight and a lightness all at once. It was a gift of such magnitude that his heart felt too small to contain the gratitude he felt for it. A smile, born from the very depths of this feeling, began to form on his lips. It was not a conscious act, not a decision to arrange his features in an expression of happiness. It was a purely involuntary response, the natural and inevitable overflow of the profound contentment that had filled him to the brim. The smile was slow and gentle, a soft, upward curve that seemed to lift the very muscles of his face, easing lines he hadn't known were there. It was a smile of pure, serene satisfaction, the physical manifestation of the quiet, sun-like warmth that now radiated from his core. He felt it in the crinkling at the corners of his eyes, in the complete and utter relaxation of his jaw. It was a smile that was not for anyone else, not a performance or a communication, but a simple, honest reflection of the state of his soul. He was a man who knew himself to be blessed beyond measure, and his face could not help but show it. He drew in a long, slow breath, his lungs expanding fully, and as he inhaled, it felt as though he was breathing in the very essence of his peaceful home, the quiet scent of old books and the silent, comforting presence of a life well lived and deeply loved. As he exhaled, a slow and complete release, He felt a gentle, unspoken urge. The immense abstract feeling of gratitude that filled him needed a physical anchor, a connection to the tangible world. His right hand, which had been resting palm down on the soft wool of the blanket, began to move. It lifted slowly, a deliberate and graceful gesture, his arm extending out over the small space between the sofa and the coffee table. His fingers were relaxed, held slightly apart, as they moved through the warm, still air of the room. His eyes remained fixed on the photograph, his smile unwavering as his hand floated closer to its destination. He was not reaching to pick it up, not to possess it, but simply to make contact, to bridge the final gap between the feeling in his heart and the object that had so powerfully evoked it. His intention was simply to touch, to confirm, to give thanks in a way that was as silent and as heartfelt as the gratitude itself. His fingertips, sensitive and seeking, made contact with the edge of the wooden frame. The touch was impossibly light, a mere whisper of skin against wood. He felt the cool, smooth, solid reality of the frame beneath his fingers. He could feel the faint, almost imperceptible texture of the wood grain, the sharp, clean line of its outer edge. It was real. It was here. The sensation, as simple as it was profoundly grounding. It was a small act that held a vast meaning. It was an affirmation of everything. The memory was real. The girl was real. The love was real. And the beautiful, quiet, and contented life that had grown from that single miraculous seed was the most real and wonderful thing of all. He let his fingers rest there for a long moment, the simple physical contact a perfect and complete expression of the silent, grateful monologue that continued to unfold in the quiet, peaceful sanctuary of his heart. The touch anchored his joy, pinning the vast ethereal feeling of gratitude to the solid and beautiful reality of his present moment. His fingertips lingered for a final, weightless moment against the cool, smooth wood of the picture frame, a silent and complete expression of the gratitude that had filled him. The connection was made, the feeling was anchored. Then, with an almost imperceptible slowness, he drew his hand back. The slight whisper of his skin leaving the polished surface was the only sound in the room. His hand returned to his side, coming to rest again on the soft wool of the blanket. The journey into the past was over, and a gentle, peaceful finality had settled over him. A long, slow breath escaped his lips, not a sigh of sadness or of weariness, but of a deep and profound contentment, the quiet, audible release of a soul completely at peace. The sound was soft, a barely there exhalation that was quickly absorbed by the thick cushions and the silent, listening air of the room. This gentle sigh was a turning point, the softest of hinges upon which the evening would now turn, a transition from the deep internal world of reflective stillness to the quiet external world of gentle, purposeful action. He placed his palms flat against the sofa cushions on either side of him, the yielding fabric and the firm support beneath it a familiar sensation. He pressed down, and the muscles in his arms engaged, a slow and steady tensing. He did not spring up. He rose. The movement was a gradual unfolding, a deliberate and unhurried reversal of the comfortable sinking he had enjoyed moments before. His body lifted, his back straightening, the weight shifting from the sofa to his own 2 feet planted firmly on the floor. He felt the thick, soft fibers of the rug yield under his weight, a plush and silent welcome. He stood for a moment, simply allowing his body to adjust to this new upright posture, a silent figure in the warm golden light. The cocoon of the sofa, the comforting weight of the blanket had been left behind, but the warmth and the peace they had provided remained with him, an internal atmosphere that he would now carry with him through the final, quiet rituals of the evening. The time for rest and remembrance was drawing to a close, and the time for gentle, orderly closure was beginning. Before he moved away from the sofa, his gaze fell upon the blanket that lay in a soft, rumpled heap where he had been sitting. It was a picture of comfort fulfilled, its purpose served. But to leave it there would have been to leave a sentence unfinished, a gentle piece of music without its final resolving chord. The quiet order of the house was a reflection of the quiet order of his own mind, and the urge to restore that harmony was a natural and gentle one. He bent down, his movements still slow and fluid, and took hold of the soft, heavy wool. He gathered the blanket into his arms, its comforting weight and rustic texture a final, pleasant sensation. He held it for a moment, a soft and substantial armful of warmth, before he began the small, meticulous ritual of folding it. He found 2 corners and brought them together, the heavy fabric falling into a neat, straight line. He laid the folded half over, his hands moving with a practiced and gentle efficiency. He smoothed the surface of the wool, his palms gliding over the thick braided stitches, a tactile conversation with the object. He felt the slight, pleasing roughness of the yarn, the yielding softness of its body. It was an act of care, a small, silent expression of gratitude for the comfort the blanket had provided. He folded it again, creating a tidy, compact rectangle of cream-colored wool, its chaotic, comfortable sprawl now contained in a shape of perfect, peaceful order. He turned to the arm of the sofa, the place where the blanket had been waiting for him earlier. He leaned forward and placed it there, not tossing it, but setting it down with a careful and deliberate touch. He adjusted its position, making sure its edges were aligned with the line of the armchair, restoring it to its state of quiet readiness. It now rested as it had before, a silent and patient promise of warmth, ready to offer its comfort again on another evening, another day. With the blanket now settled, he turned his attention back to the coffee table, to the single object that had been the catalyst for his journey into memory. He reached down for the framed photograph, his hands moving to either side of it. He did not simply snatch it up. He cupped it, his fingers curling gently around the wooden edges, his thumbs coming to rest on the cool, smooth surface of the glass. He lifted it with a reverence that was so ingrained it was entirely unconscious. It felt solid and substantial in his hands, its familiar weight a connection to the profound and weighty love it represented. He held it before him, his gaze fixing upon the image for one final intimate moment. He looked at her smiling face, at the way the sunlight had caught in her hair, at the pure, unadulterated joy that radiated from her eyes. The memory of the young witch in the candlelight and the image of the radiant woman in the autumn sun were now one and the same, a perfect and complete picture of the person who was the center of his world. A faint, tender smile touched his lips, and he lifted his thumb, rubbing it in a slow, gentle circle over the glass, a silent, loving caress directly over her smiling cheek. Holding the photograph with both hands, as if he were carrying a precious and fragile relic, he turned and began to walk across the room. His stockinged feet made no sound on the plush rug, his movement a silent, gliding procession through the quiet, golden air. He moved toward the fireplace, the dark, silent heart of the house, the place that served as the home's quiet and unofficial altar. Each step was deliberate, unhurried, a small and respectful pilgrimage from one sacred space to another. The silence in the room was absolute now, broken only by the steady, rhythmic beat of the grandfather clock, which seemed to mark the cadence of his slow and purposeful steps. He reached the cool slate of the hearth and stopped, his gaze lifting to the dark wooden mantelpiece, to the small empty space in the constellation of memories that was waiting for its star to be returned. He lifted the photograph, raising it to its place of honor among the other frozen moments of their life together. He set it down gently, the wooden base meeting the wooden mantel with a soft, solid, and satisfying sound. But he did not immediately let go. His hands lingered, his fingers making small, meticulous adjustments. He nudged it a fraction of an inch to the left, then a fraction back to the right. He tilted it forward, then back, ensuring it was perfectly upright, that its alignment with the other frames was precise and harmonious. It was an act of quiet devotion, a curator's care for the gallery of his own heart. When he was satisfied that it was perfectly placed, that the order of his small sanctuary of memories had been fully and beautifully restored, only then did he release his hold, drawing his hands back slowly. He had taken a memory out, held it, and now returned it to its proper place, the circle of the evening's reflection now complete. He took a single step back from the hearth, creating a small distance that allowed him to take in the room as a whole. His gaze swept slowly across the space, a final, satisfied inspection. The blanket was folded neatly on the arm of the sofa, a picture of placid order. The photograph was back in its rightful place, its smiling face once again a quiet, watchful guardian of the room. The cushions on the sofa were slightly compressed from where he had sat, the only faint, lingering evidence of his peaceful occupation, an impression that would slowly fade through the night. The room was tidy, calm, and settled. It was a space that had been used for its intended purpose, for comfort, for peace, for quiet contemplation, and now its work for the evening was done. A profound sense of completion settled over him. With a final, gentle purpose, he moved to the small table beside the armchair, the home of the single lamp that had bathed the room in its warm, honeyed glow. He reached out his hand, his fingers finding the small, cool metallic turnkey at the base of the lamp. He paused for a fraction of a second, his hand hovering in a silent final appreciation of the warm and golden world the light had created. Then, with a soft, decisive click, he turned the switch. The light vanished. The room did not plunge into total blackness, but was instead instantly transformed, submerged in a deep and gentle twilight. The vibrant golds and warm browns were replaced by soft, indistinct shades of grey and deep, velvety shadows. The only illumination now was the pale, ghostly light that spilled in from the hallway, a single soft pathway of low light that cut across the floor, just enough to see the familiar outlines of the furniture. The character of the room changed in that instant, from a bright, warm haven of activity and thought to a quiet, slumbering space, a room that was now officially at rest. The sudden darkness had a profound effect on the sound of the room as well. The steady ticking of the clock seemed to grow louder, more distinct, its rhythmic pulse the only living voice in the deep and profound quiet. The evening was over. The gentle descent into the final piece of the night had begun. With the room now resting in a gentle and profound darkness, he turned from the lamp and began his final journey of the evening. He moved through the transformed landscape of the living room, a world of soft shadows and familiar unseen shapes. The pale, unassuming light spilling from the hallway was his only guide, casting a long ethereal pathway across the dark floorboards and the edge of the plush rug. His steps were completely silent, his stockinged feet making no impression on the thick carpet, his movements slow and careful, not from a fear of stumbling but from a deep and innate respect for the quiet that now reigned supreme. The house was breathing around him, a slow and steady respiration of peace. He was no longer the master of the house, but a quiet inhabitant moving through its slumbering body, careful not to disturb its deep and well-earned rest. The silence was no longer just an absence of noise, it had become a presence in itself, a soft, heavy blanket that muffled the entire world. He reached the foot of the stairs and placed his hand upon the cool, smooth wood of the banister. It felt solid and reassuring in the darkness, a faithful guide for the ascent into the upper, more private sanctum of the home. He began to climb, his body moving with a familiar, easy rhythm. The stairs did not creak. They were as silent as the rest of the house, his weight absorbed by the thick carpet runner that was a river of soft shadow in the gloom. His hand glided upward along the polished wood, a constant, tactile connection to the structure of his home, a silent, flowing conversation with the house itself. With each upward step, the world downstairs, the living room with its ghosts of memory, the kitchen with its silent appliances, the very scent of the day, seemed to fall further and further away, dissolving into the deep and profound stillness of the night. He was ascending into the very heart of the quiet, the place where the house and its inhabitants truly slept and dreamed. He reached the upper landing, a space of even deeper shadows and a more concentrated silence. The air here was different, warmer, still holding the faint, clean scent of linen and the day's lingering warmth. He moved down the short, carpeted hallway, his destination the sliver of soft, warm light that was visible from beneath the closed bedroom door. He reached the door and his hand found the cool, familiar brass of the knob. He turned it slowly, the mechanism clicking open with a sound so faint it was barely audible, a tiny metallic whisper in the vast, silent cathedral of the night. He pushed the door inward and stepped across the threshold, entering the final, most intimate space of his sanctuary. The room was bathed in a gentle, focused light, a small and solitary island of warmth in the vast, dark ocean of the sleeping house. There, in the soft pool of light, cast by a single lamp on her bedside table, was his wife. She was propped up against a mound of soft pillows, her body a familiar and beloved silhouette, a book resting open in her hands. She was the witch from his memory, the woman from the photograph, the steady, constant center of his entire life, and she was here, waiting. The sight of her, so calm, so present, so deeply at peace in their shared space, was the perfect, final chord to the beautiful, nostalgic music that had been playing in his heart all evening. As if sensing his presence rather than hearing it, she looked up from the page, her eyes finding his across the quiet, shadowed space. And then she smiled. It was not a wide or dramatic smile. It was a small, gentle, and infinitely tender curve of her lips. It was a smile of pure, unspoken understanding. It was a smile that said, "You are home." It was a smile that held within it the shared history of 1,000 such quiet evenings, the deep and unwavering comfort of a love that needed no words to be expressed. He smiled back, his own expression a perfect and heartfelt mirror of her own, a silent and complete answer to her silent, loving question. Her smile lingered for a moment, and then with a slow, graceful movement, she reached for the bookmark on her nightstand, a thin slip of colored ribbon, and carefully marked her place. She closed the book, the soft thud of the cover meeting the pages, a quiet, final sound that marked the end of her own solitary journey for the evening. She placed the book beside the lamp, its story now paused, waiting for the morning. Then her hand moved to the lamp itself. She looked at him one last time in the warm, gentle light, her eyes full of a soft and sleepy affection, before she turned the small switch. The light clicked off and the room was plunged into a soft and intimate darkness. It was not an absolute blackness, but a gentle, velvety gloom, for the curtains were slightly parted, and a pale, ethereal moonlight filtered in, painting a ghostly silver rectangle upon the far wall and tracing the edges of the furniture in faint, shimmering lines. He stood for a moment, allowing his eyes to adjust to this new and beautiful dimness. Then, drawn by the silent call of the world outside, he moved to the window. He looked out, his gaze traveling over the sleeping landscape of their neighborhood. The world was a tapestry of deep shadows and soft, silvery light. The houses across the street were dark, silent monoliths, their windows like closed, sleeping eyes. The branches of the trees, now bare of their autumn leaves, were intricate skeletal silhouettes drawn against a sky of deep, star-dusted indigo. It was a world at rest, a world of profound and absolute peace. And then he saw it. Down the street, on a neighbor's porch, a single jack-o'-lantern was still burning. Its crooked, happy smile was a tiny, distant spark of warm orange light in the vast, cool-toned silence of the night. It was a final, gentle echo of his memory, a small, winking ember of the past, still glowing in the present. He watched it for a long moment, a quiet and unexpected bookend to his evening's journey, a final, beautiful reminder of the night it had all begun. With a final look at the tiny, distant flame, he turned from the window and moved toward the bed. He pulled back the heavy comforter, the fabric cool and smooth against his hands, the sound a soft, satisfying whisper in the quiet room. He slid into the bed, the crisp, clean sheets a cool and welcoming shock against his warm skin. He settled into his familiar place, his body finding the well-known contours and hollows of the mattress, a feeling of coming home in the most profound and literal sense. He shifted slightly, and then he felt it, the gentle, radiant warmth of his wife beside him in the darkness. She was a constant, living presence, her nearness a source of comfort so deep and so ingrained that it was as essential to him as the air he breathed. She was the anchor of his world, the steady, quiet center of his heart. He lay there, in the perfect, silent darkness, feeling the day and its memories, the house and its peace, all settle around him like a final, perfect layer of comfort. Then, with a slow and final exhalation of contentment, he closed his eyes. The visual world vanished and the final, most intimate senses took over. The only sound in the universe was the soft, impossibly gentle rhythm of her breathing, a quiet, steady rise and fall that was the most reassuring music he had ever known. It mingled in the far distance of his perception with the faint, almost inaudible ticking of the clock from the floor below, the slow, steady heartbeat of their sleeping home. The house was at peace. His heart was at peace. He felt the immense and beautiful weight of his gratitude, not as a thought, but as a warm liquid feeling that spread through his limbs, soothing him, holding him. It was the last feeling he was aware of, this profound and silent thankfulness for the girl in the witch's costume, for the love that had filled his life, for the quiet, perfect peace of this very moment, as he let go of the day and drifted, finally and completely, into a deep and dreamless sleep. Thank you for sharing this quiet moment with us. It is in these small, peaceful routines that we can find our calm. If this story brought you a little bit of comfort, a like and a subscription helps our bookshelf grow and reach others who might need a peaceful story tonight. We have another tale waiting for you very soon. Until then, sleep well.